everybody. So today is the start of a new book, Staying Sober, A Guide for Relapse Prevention by Gorski and Miller. This book is about relapse prevention based on years of research that Gorski, Miller, and other colleagues have done regarding relapse, particularly in people who were chronic relapsers, who were trying to recover, who wanted to recover, but could not seem to do it without repeated relapse. So we're starting with Chapter 1. Chapter 1 is a basic primer about relapse and addictive disease and an outline of what they're going to discuss in the book. Some really good stuff here. The first thing I highlighted was this book is intended to comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable. It will comfort the disturbed because many relapsed people are victims of mistaken beliefs and have relapsed because they do not know how to prevent it. So this book is intended to offer some hope to people who have relapsed and are having trouble figuring out why. This book has some good ideas about why, and that's going to give people some hope and hopefully the tools they need to prevent future relapse. It goes on to say they blame, and I'm just going to keep reading here, they blame themselves for past relapses and believe that they are hopeless because they do not know what to do to prevent future relapse. It is our intent to give them hope, correct their mistaken beliefs, and help them set up plans based on accurate information that can free them from the hopelessness of repeated relapse. We do not intend to disturb those who are comfortable in a healthy sobriety, but it is our intent to disturb the naively comfortable. These are the people who believe that as long as they abstain from alcohol and drugs and bring the body to meetings, they do not need to be concerned about relapse. They are not aware that recovery is more than that. They are not aware that there are many, many individuals who are attending meetings and not drinking, but are still not sober. They are just not drinking or using drugs. These people are in high risk of relapse, even though most of them will strongly deny that fact. We intend to show that realistically facing the possibility of relapse is the only way to prevent it. Relapse is a complex process. It cannot be explained simply. And so he goes on to explain all of the different things that they're going to talk about in the book. And he says, finally, we will discuss addiction as a biopsychosocial disease. This means that it is a physical disease that also affects the mind and relationships. So far, we've heard some interesting stuff. One of the things that really stood out to me is the intention they have to disturb the naively comfortable people in sobriety. Now, I think we have all met people like this who feel like they have sobriety down, they've got everything under control, and they start to kind of go away from the program. They stop doing the things that they're supposed to be doing because they don't think they need that stuff anymore. And so those are the people that he's talking about here, that he wants to address how doing that very thing is actually contributing to the possibility of relapse. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit and talk about their idea of relapse, because it's not just about going back to using. They say most people think of using addictive chemicals when they think of relapse. Certainly addictive use is relapse, but because of research in recent years, more and more people are recognizing that the process of relapse begins before addictive use starts. People can become dysfunctional in sobriety without drinking or using. So when these folks are talking about relapse, and when all of us talk about relapse, we should be talking about not necessarily using drugs or alcohol again. That's certainly a relapse, but we should be talking about the dysfunctional aspect of people who go into relapse tendencies. And so he explains this a little bit more by saying the relapse process is the movement away from recovery. This does not mean that if you have hit a rough spot in recovery or are experiencing some pain and struggle, you are relapsing. So that's normal. Hitting rough spots, struggling a little bit, and then dealing with it in the way that we've been taught by reaching out to people, talking to sponsor, working some steps, going to meetings. That's normal. That's part of recovery, and indeed that's part of life. So, and learning how to healthfully deal with that is an important part of things. It means that if in general you are not doing things that contribute to the process of recovery, you may be unconsciously moving in the direction of relapse. If you are stuck in partial recovery, you are in high risk of relapse. Recovery from addictive disease starts with accepting the fact that you cannot safely use alcohol or mood-altering drugs. But just knowing that addictive chemicals are harmful is not enough. You must stop using them. Not using addictive chemicals is abstinence, but abstinence alone is not enough. Abstinence simply allows the recovery process to begin. It is the means to an end, the means to normal living. Learning to live normally without addictive use requires more than abstinence. So we talk about this a lot. A lot of people in recovery come to recovery first because they want to stop using drugs or alcohol. Drugs or alcohol are the problem they're trying to solve. But we realize that this is about more than, that's just the first part of this. This is about more than stopping the use of drugs or alcohol. It's about learning how to live. And that's why we have to follow a program. And once we get to the point where we can go a day, a week, a month, a year, years at a time without using drugs or alcohol, that doesn't mean we're cured. It doesn't mean that we back off of the program. It means that we have to continue to live the way that we've learned how to live in recovery so that we can prevent the tendency to go back into relapse. And they talk about this a little bit. It says relapse and recovery are intimately related. You cannot experience recovery from addiction without experiencing a tendency toward relapse. So I certainly have experienced a tendency toward relapse. I've talked about this before where my old thought patterns pop into my head, and this happens to all of us, maybe we start to cop a resentment. We get that old ego coming back at us, and we start to cop a resentment that we really shouldn't, or start to feel like, get a little pissed off at someone who threatened our ego, our pride a little bit. But if we're strong in our recovery, we recognize that's happening, and then we do what we need to do to address that so it doesn't take over our lives. So he goes on to point out relapse tendencies are a lot like poison mushrooms or mold. They grow best in the darkness. The light of clear, accurate thinking tends to kill relapse tendencies very quickly. So, I know a lot of people like this in recovery who will openly share, hey, this happened to me today, and it was like the old me came out, and here's what I did to deal with it, and now I'm doing fine. That's shining the light on this, and that's recognizing that, there's that tendency toward relapse creeping through, and if you don't do what you've been taught in recovery, if you don't shine the light on it, you're going to keep going down that road, and eventually the pain gets so much that you turn to alcohol and drugs again to deal with it. And that's what he says here. When the sobriety-based symptoms of addiction become severe enough, a person begins to become dysfunctional even though they're not drinking or using. In AA, these episodes of dysfunction are known as dry drunks. In this book, we call them the relapse syndrome. When these symptoms of the relapse syndrome make life painful enough, many alcoholics choose to drink or use drugs to gain temporary relief from the pain. Others do not drink, but they develop serious life and health problems related to the relapse syndrome. So I think we have all met, I have a sponsee who has an AA group that he goes to, and, well, he doesn't anymore. He decided not to go to this group anymore because there was a very toxic individual in this group who has years and years of sobriety, but will say very offensive things to people, will condescend to people who are young in their recovery, and who overall makes life very awkward and painful for the people around him. And my sponsee did everything. We talked through issues that he was having with this guy, and he did everything he could to try to deal with this person and in a positive way. And it just wasn't working. And finally, it became one of those situations where it's like, well, best thing to do is probably move on. Maybe this is a sign that there's room for you at another group. And sure enough, my sponsee has found another group that he likes even better, and has found his own sponsee at that group. So it all worked out. But the point is that we meet people in sobriety and in recovery who, even with years of sobriety, are acting just the same way they did when they were drinking and using drugs. And those people are in an active emotional, mental relapse. They're experiencing that even though they're not using. And that is something else that we want to use relapse prevention techniques and planning to stay away from. So this was a lot to cover. I'd be very interested to hear thoughts about this, because I know relapse is a big topic. There's a lot of opinions about it. But the idea here is that, the relapse in some ways is kind of like the force of gravity. And it's always pulling at us, and if we just allow ourselves to be pulled, it'll pull us in. It may take years, may take days, but it'll pull us in. And so what this book is about is, how do we plan to prevent relapse? What do we plan on doing? And the successful people that I know in recovery, the people who have more than a year, who have, decades of recovery, they have a plan for how to deal with life and how to deal with these tendencies, and they execute on that plan every day. And that plan usually starts from the second they get up in the morning and ends right before they fall asleep at night. So that's the kind of stuff that this book is going to talk about. I'm really excited about this. I like what I've read so far, and I'll be back here tomorrow with more. Have a good day, everybody.